Welcome back to the Panic Room, everyone, and to another episode of our podcast book, The Madman's Library. Alright guys, so today our chapter is Curiosities of Science. And you know, I feel like right off the bat with that title, I was like, we're about to talk about some weird shit. And I wasn't wrong. Okay, so first I have to show you the very first picture simply because I love skulls and skeletons, and I feel like a lot of you probably do too. Now, obviously, just like with all of my past videos, stay tuned to the end. I will give you close-ups of all of the pictures out of this chapter, but let's just check this out. Look at that. Is that not cool? I love skeletons and stuff. Spooky, scary skeleton. Yeah, I love those. All right, so the first thing we have to talk about, you guys know how a lot of times in history it was frowned upon to do like autopsies and things. Okay, we've had a lot of crazy shit happen because of that little prevailing thought, and this first story is no different. So we're gonna take it all the way back to ancient Greece with a guy by the name of Galen. And he was fascinated with blood and like the circulatory system. And they think that the reason he had this fascination is because he was like an assistant to one of the physicians that would service the gladiators at like the Parthenon. And I'm assuming they got real messed up because their particular line of work. And I guess he got to see a lot of the things, you know, the terrible wounds, and I guess that let him see, you know, the internal workings, so he became fascinated with it. All right, so this guy thought that our bodies actually ate blood, and that the liver had to continually produce extra blood because that's what our bodies would eat and absorb. This is why you don't make rules against doing autopsies, because you get shit like that. So keeping with the blood thing, we get this little story about this Cornish physician by the name of Richard Lower, who was 1631 to 1691. He had this experiment where he injected soup into dogs to see if it would nourish them. Yeah. Talk about having PETA breathing down your damn neck if you tried that shit today. Can you believe that? But I mean, you know, a lot of these, I was like, well, you know, I can't really fault them. I mean, they didn't know any better. You know, this is how you find stuff out. This is why we have science, right? So, but I was like, wow, soup. And then to kind of take it a step further and also kind of harken back to our previous episode with religion, we had this other guy by the name of Arthur Koga. And he believed that you could inject like animal blood to help people. A la like injecting sheep blood into people whose brains were too warm to invoke like Christ in them for a cure. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. Sheep's blood. At least it's not pigeon shoes. Okay guys, so this particular chapter has some amazing artwork in it. And you know what? I'm really not surprised because, you know, scientists, you know, and people who were studying the human body or things like that, I feel like, you know, they were more apt to chronicle what they were looking at. And, you know, of course we have some of that still hanging around today. For example, like this guy. Yeah. Did anybody else think of Operation? Like that old game where like if you hit the side it buzzes? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. So this is a wound man illustration from 1420, you know, just showing the various injuries that a patient could have. So it's essentially like a medical handbook, kind of, sort of. All right, guys, so let's go back to this Galen guy for just a second. We're still in Greece. So he thought that if you had warm blood, that it generated like soot. I'm assuming, because in my head, I can kind of see like, okay, warmth, fire, soot. I'm assuming that's where the connections were made. But he thought that this soot generated by warm blood kind of could be expelled out of the pore, and that's where hair came from. Never in 1,000 years would I have thought that, but you know, it's funny and very interesting to me to see where, you know, a lot of people got these ideas back in the day, you know, before we had things like microscopes and all of this accoutrement that we have today that lets us, you know, study things on such a deep level. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Soot making hair. Okay, so let's talk about some cures. Now you guys know it's about to get weird because I know all of you have heard about like bloodletting and all of that, and there was a lot of talk in this chapter about blood specifically. because I feel like, that's sort of where a lot of the focus was back then. I guess they thought that different disorders of the blood or different temperatures or what have you could cause this whole range of issues. And yeah, let's talk about some of the cures for some of these. So before we begin, this book is called the Bald's Leech Book. And no, if you're like me, you thought like leech, right? Blood, leech. No. It is actually a term that is taken from a modernization of the Old English word lechbok. There I go, trying to speak other languages. And it actually means like prescriptions or book of prescriptions. So that makes more sense now, even though it's a pretty badass name, the Leech Book. Okay, so it says, for example, if blood runs from a man's nose, poke into the ear a whole ear of barley so that he be unaware of it. Now, I took that one of two ways. Does that mean that you have to put the barley in his ear without him knowing, or it doesn't work? Or does that mean that the barley in his ear distracts him from the blood, so he's not aware of the blood coming out of his nose? Comment down below, tell me, how did you take that? Okay, so another one is a remedy for mickle hicket, which is commonly known as the hiccups. And it says that you get the patient to drink warm water and throw up by putting a feather in oil and poking him frequently in the throat that he may spew. Ew, God. A feather in oil poking you in the throat. That sounds disgusting. So for shoulder pain, you mingle, and I'm going to read this exactly as it says, okay? Mingle the turd of an old swine, which be a field goer with old lard, and wipe it on the sore spot. Why? Why did we put so much animal shit in medicine back in the day? Oh my God. Okay. For warts, apply a concoction of dog urine and mouse blood. Again with the animal stuff. Ugh. For demonic possession, oh, well, my, that escalated quickly. For demonic possession, the affected party is given the rather wonderful recommendation of drinking an herbal medicine out of a church bell. Now, it doesn't say what the medicine was, but that seems remarkably mild compared to, like, pig turds and dog pee. So there was this term, and I had never heard of this, called a piss prophet. It was defined in one of the books that we have mentioned in a previous episode, which is the Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue, as a physician who can tell what's wrong with his patients by tasting their pee. And they refer to them as a piss prophet. That's hilarious. That is so funny to me. Piss prophet. Holy God. And apparently there is a book by Theophilus Protopatharius from the 7th century titled simply On Urines. Oh wow, I bet you that's a fun read. It says it was a helpful book that contained colored urine wheels to compare the patient's sample and advise accordingly. Is anyone else glad that you live nowadays instead of back then? Or is it just me? Okay, so apparently by the 1600s, this whole idea of piss prophets had started to dry up. That is the author's joke, not mine. And there were such satirical works as The Piss Prophet or Certain Piss Pot Lectures, which was written by Thomas Bryan in 1637. So apparently people just started making fun of them and doctors stopped doing it. Okay, so the author starts to go into like this progression of the medical field and how it still was kind of batshit insane. And he starts talking about this particular book called The Widow's Treasure. And it was essentially a book of medical advice, advising such things as rotted mouse given to children to eat will remedieth the pissing of the bed. Yeah, you give them a rotting mouse. God, I'd be terrified to pee the bed too if I had to eat a rotten mouse. Then it also recommends to boil and steam your clothes with mercury in order to get rid of the lice. And our author notes, also your higher brain function. Let's see. To jolt the comatose awake, French physician Bernard de Gourdon, 1258 to 1318, recommends a full-throated screaming at the patient. Imagine walking into this dude's hospital and there's like 5 comatose patients and he just like calmly walks one to each bed and just starts screaming at him. Oh, but he also notes that if the screaming doesn't work, you can hold squealing pigs to their faces. And if all else fails, pluck out their chest hair. Insanity. Batshit insanity. All right, so our next book that our author talks about is A Most Excellent and Perfect Homish Apothecary from 1561, in which the German physician and alchemist Hieronymus Bruchwig has a foolproof test for seeing if someone has demonic possession. You take the heart and liver of a fish, specifically the pike fish, and put it into a pot with glowing hot coals, and hold the same to the patient so that the smoke may enter him. I'm assuming he's breathing the smoke from the cooking fish, perhaps. If he is possessed, he cannot abide that smoke, but will rageth in anger. Okay, so there is a lot of full page pictures here, but the one that I really, really want to show you guys is the rendition of a pregnant woman. Hold on to your hats. Again, stay tuned to the end if you'd like to see a little bit more up close and personal. But yeah, look at that right here. Look at the little tiny baby all the way down here. Yeah, that's a pregnant woman. Yeah, that's her insides. That's how babies look before they're born, in case anybody was wondering. All right, and so the next few pages are actually big renditions of different alchemy manuscripts that are absolutely beautiful. And there's one that actually credits the author as Zoroaster. So again, we're seeing this like mingling of religion and science, a lot like what we touched on in the previous episode when we had our religious chapter. You see that still coming through, and I think it's really like a mark of the time. And so here are some of those texts and photos that are credited to Zoroaster. Right down here. All of these. Yeah, I thought that one with the dragon is kind of cool. Don't you guys think? Anyway, stay tuned if you want to see all of these kind of up close and with a little bit more detail. Okay, so the author starts to go in on how like later in the like 15th and 16th centuries, we started to get more physicians that had more experience with the internal workings of the human body. And apparently some of these were some absolutely kick-ass artists, because he talks about one in particular, and this is a Flemish name, so excuse me while I butcher this. Andreas Versailles, who was a Flemish physician at the University of Padua, and his work De Humani Corporis Fabrica, or On the Fabric of the Human Body. All right, guys, so he actually gives a full page picture of this particular work, the Siddhi Ataname from 1745 by Gautier d'Agenais, which is an atlas like illustrating the anatomical workings of the head, neck, and shoulders at the time. And he said that this was based on some physicians that had actually dissected cadavers. Take this in. I thought it was beautiful, and I think my horror lovers especially will enjoy this, but look at that. I mean, look at that detail. That is art, is it not? I think that's beautiful in its own way. But you know, it was really like a first of its kind, because, you know, we're just now getting into where physicians feel a little bit more comfortable doing these things like autopsies and stuff with cadavers, because it had been like severely looked down upon and in many cases illegal for so many hundreds of years. Okay, so I thought this was kind of neat. It always occurred to me, like, how did they study things that weren't really physical, if that makes sense, like a metabolism? Yeah, so we have the Santiaro Sentaro's De Statica Medicina, which he was a Venetian physiologist, and he made this little contraption right here. And it's exactly what it looks like. It's a weighted chair. And this guy, he said he ate, you know, excreted, all of that. He would weigh his food, weigh everything that came out of him. And that was like the first study of metabolism, you know, to like see like how weight and food and excrement and all of that work together. I thought that was kind of fascinating. Like, I mean, this guy literally ate all of his meals and did all of his business in this like weighted chair and stuff, and then had to catalog it. I mean, that is dedication. So then our author starts going into something that I think will be of interest to a lot of you, and it is something that he calls the prodigy books. And This is, to me, almost like the origins of fascinations with things like freak circuses, because these books essentially catalog like all of these, you know, amazing births or, you know, medical marvels or things like this. And really, this seems to be like the birth of like the fascination with stuff like this. And I mean things like conjoined twins or, you know, an extra digit or, you know, any number of like medical oddities, I guess you could say, of the day. And in true human fashion, of course, people started to, you know, make hoaxes and try to get in on, you know, this, I guess, in some like plea to be famous or what have you. So you had things like false reports of, you know, two-headed humans and all of this. But one that stuck out to me was in 1512, there was a birth of the monster of Ravenna in Italy. And yeah, take a little look at this. Yeah, those were different renditions of him. Yeah, I told you guys, humanity doesn't change. Not at all. I mean, can you not see? Same kind of shit happens today. You know, something is popular, people want to get in on it. That's exactly what happened here. Okay, so the next one. I've heard of this before, but I did not realize that it was as widely done as our author goes into. So women have always been, I guess, a little mysterious to our male counterparts, even way back when. And pregnancy was no different. Obviously, there weren't women physicians, so to speak. There was probably, I would guess, something like a midwife. But, you know, the physicians, from what our author tells us in this book, you know, because of the, I guess, societal and religious qualms of the day, you know, obviously they couldn't examine a woman the way a pregnant woman probably needs to be examined and cared for. So there was still a lot of mystery surrounding birth and whatnot. So there was this woman by the name of Mary Toft, who in 1726 became quite famous for giving birth to a litter of rabbits. And of course she comes clean, saying that it was all a hoax because, you know, I guess the way our author describes it, I guess they had to hold up a sheet, you know, where like the bottom half and the top half of the woman are separated, and so she was able to like put the rabbits out. I don't know, but that's hilarious because people believed this shit. And apparently the rabbits weren't it. Like, it talks about how like she went into labor and gave birth to pig parts at one point. And I really feel like this woman just really wanted her time to shine, and this is the avenue she picked. So guys, the next one is really awesome. It is a book called Micrographia from 1665, and it was by a guy by the name of Robert Hooke. And this book, our author even, you can tell by the way he writes about it that he's really enamored with this particular book, because it talks about how this was the first of its kind of, to use his words, breaking open the world of the microorganism and all of the tiny shit that lives around us that we don't really think about. And this author, oh my gosh, talk about an amazing artist on top of being a scientist. He like drew out all of these tiny little microorganisms. So they have one here and it is a flea. Now keep in mind guys, I know we live in the world of like computers and all that. This guy drew this, okay? He drew this. Look at that. I mean, that is pretty damn detailed. I mean, this is the 1600s, people. You know, I thought that was just absolutely beautiful. You know, I know it's a flea, but I mean, wow. Can you imagine living back then and not even knowing that things like that exist, let alone how detailed they are? I mean, that blew me away. I thought that was so cool. I bet you that book is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. Okay, so the next one is a psychological case that I wanted to tell you guys about. Holy God, is it a whacked out case. So it is about this guy by the name of John Tilly Matthews, who was admitted into Bethlehem, which was a psychiatric hospital and popularly designated Bedlam, because again, I've said in the past, if you guys know anything about psychological history, you know that it is fraught with terrible things way back when. And, you know, this is no different. So this guy was actually arrested for yelling treason at Lord Hawkesbury during a debate in 1797, and his family started to try to get him out in the early 1800s. It says specifically 1809. And so this guy's doctor, a John Haslam, actually published a book that he called The Illustrations of Madness to support the case that this guy did not need to get out, that he still needed treatment and he was still crazy. So first, I'm going to show you the picture, okay? And I'm just going to let you take a look at it and then we'll talk about what it means, okay? So take this in. Notice all the people, right? Okay? All right, so apparently this guy's delusions centered around an insidious device that he called the Heirloom, which is what you just saw. He was convinced that a villainous gang was adept at pneumatic chemistry and that this machine was torturing him daily. And all of these people were like operating it. So you might be asking yourself, how? How is he being tortured? He said that this machine was zapping him with rays. And from like way far away, you know, that's why nobody could see it, because he was being tortured by these invisible rays. Right? Now, remember, this is like late 1700s, early 1800s that he's saying this. So he describes the effects of the rays as lobster cracking and stomach skinning. Guy had a way with words. And he actually named all of the people that ran this machine. He said that they were a gang of spies that controlled the modern politics of the day. He also said that those that were in politics that weren't part of this gang were actually under mind control from a similar machine. I mean, this is fascinating. This guy, you know, was telling his doctor all of this, and the guy put it in a book. I mean, I think that would be amazing. I would love to have a copy of that, just even like as a display piece or a coffee table book, because it's batshit insane. It's fascinating to me. You know, on a psychological level, how this guy constructed such an elaborate tale. And, you know, to be centered around like a machine. Nowadays, it's nothing for us because we're surrounded by machines. But back then, I feel like this was really advanced kind of technical talk, at least to me. You know, comment down below. Tell me what you think. All right, so guys, the last story that I think I'm going to end this video with is what our author of our podcast book, The Madman's Library, calls one of the strangest scientific collections of the 20th century. It is the scientific consensus of bonkers theories in a book called The Omphalocene, an attempt to untie the geological knot, by respected zoologist Philip Gross, who is actually the inventor of the seawater aquarium and the world's leading expert on butterfly genitalia. At least he was in 1857. And this is actually 2 years before Darwin's Origin of Species comes out, so keep that in mind. So this guy was a Christian, but he saw that there was a conflict between the ancient age of the earth and what was given as the creation date in the Bible. And he said that it could be solved with a very simple hypothesis called the omphalos, which I'm probably butchering, but that is Greek for navel. So follow me on this, guys. He says that the first human, Adam, must have had a navel because that's where we get it. We inherited it from him, right? You with me so far? Now, he recognized the fact that Adam didn't really have a need for a navel because he came directly from God. He was directly created, unlike us who have to go through the whole rigmarole of birth. So he said that God must have given him a navel to create this illusion of human ancestry. And he then draws the conclusion that fossils were also put there from God to give us like a sense of ancestry, or planetary ancestry, I guess. And he said that the point of all of this is to just test our faith. This was not very well received, but I did find it fascinating. I had never heard of what essentially, you know, without me butchering the Greek name, is the belly button theory. Oh, okay, and guys, I know I said the last one was going to be the last one, but this was so quickly mentioned that I have to throw it out there. Apparently, our author says that one of his most prized possessions, because the whole reason he's even writing The Madman's Library is because he's a lover of all these strange literary works of history, and so he says that one of his favorite is titled, If We Can Keep a Severed Head Alive. And apparently this is a whole discourse that are separated into sections about things like, what are the legal issues of keeping a severed head alive? What are the spiritual issues? Things like that. So I feel like you have to give them at least a little bit of credence for trying to be thorough. But what really made me giggle is that our author talks about, just that title, having a book like that in your bookshelf tends to garner some attention from visitors, which I bet it does. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you for hanging out for another chapter of our podcast book, The Madman's Library. And like I said, stay tuned to the end if you want to see some up-close pictures. I always try to put a little bit more up-close, detailed shots of all of the fantastic pictures in each chapter at the end of the video. So stay tuned for that. And guys, let me know down below, what are you thinking of our podcast book so far? I'm interested to see what you think because I'm loving it. I think just every chapter continues to amaze me. It really does, with some of the wacky shit that I had no idea even existed. But guys, again, thanks for hanging out, and until next time, bye for now.
You